Alright, today's Handybook is the first issue of Update 89 from, you guessed it, 1989. Here is the full cover. I have never been a fan of these covers. They look too barren and empty, and the characters are awkwardly thrown together and only sometimes in a pose that doesn't look weird. This guy was originally Captain America though. I explained and showed that in the unboxing of the omnibus of this series. I won't repeat stuff from that too much. Although one thing I will is that Marky Mark G is barely, if at all, involved in these 8 issues. These are Peter Sanford and Son's thing, and the key difference between the two is that Peter Sanford and Son will only ever tell us what was on the page. Marky Mark G would sometimes introduce new information in profiles or provide a bridge between certain stories in a character's history, but none of that here. This might be the sorriest excuse for a character that any Handybook has ever opened on. This guy exists because Christopher Clairvoyant wasn't allowed to touch any more of Albert Moore's Captain Britain characters. A restriction that was lifted, unfortunately. The evil brotherhood of evil muties of evil wannabes from the first 6 issues of Extra Factors. The only one that matters is Vixen, who does go on to have some history. Stinger Bell, I guess she was in a couple of those issues I liked from the late 2000s. She dated Snowman briefly. Reason it didn't work out was probably because he was actually gay all along. Moonman's girlfriend, Marla Singer. One thing I forgot to mention in the unboxing was there are loads of references to profiles in later issues that don't exist. Both the entries for Moonman characters in this point to a profile for Khonshu, a profile that does not exist. You see, there was a lot of behind-the-scenes problems with this series. Profiles were done and ditched. Changes happened in the comics that totally negated the profiles or necessitated other profiles. From what I understand, stuff like Khonshu had to be dropped to make room for characters like Vision, who had only very recently had a major change. There's also what I would call some bad page management. This profile for Armageddon as an example of that. This second page here is mostly pictures. And worst of all, I am sure that is Robert Liefeldman's lack of talent being given half the page space. We have an entry for Armageddon's jockeys, which only includes profiles for 2 of them. Wingman obviously has his own profile in a page or 2's time, but Pestilence, she had an entry back in 85 before her transformation into a jockey. But surely that is a valid update to detail, especially when you have a profile like this for Armageddon's jockeys. We get a lot of solo entries for Justice League members, but there are a few that notably don't get profiles. I am noticing that a lot of the profiles have been given 2 pages and then most of the second page is pictures. Wingman over here. This is a good example of why we needed an update. This character had undergone radical changes. He had literally been rebuilt, and we need to know about that. Wingman's profile covers 2.5 pages, so there is no argument to be made that they are trying to balance all these profiles into only full pages. This profile for Archlight. Should I get into my theory? Okay, right. I reckon if you look, the layout here is atrocious. The text is only in one column. I reckon this was a last-minute thing inserted to balance out these pages because Wingman wound up running over. And this profile is dragged straight from the Paredes entry later in the series and dropped here to fill space. That is the exact length of one of those character profiles within a team entry. CF this. Another character who came back in those late 2000s Excellent Men books. She dressed a lot better when she came back. Major victory from the New Warriors. Or rather, soon to be from the New Warriors. Every time I see this image, I think this should have been the cover to Marvel 2-for-1 69. Steve Engle-Tyne rubbish that never appeared again. I have said before, but they started doing profiles for civilian supporting characters in this volume. And obviously they had done some before. But it is weird, the ones they avoided doing. I used to think that it was the case that they did ones who had powers at some point, like Dickie Jones. And in this case, Jennifer Connelly, or Liv Tyler, did have powers for a time. But then, there's also a profile for Henry Guy Ritchie. And then in the Book of the Dead, there are entries for quite a lot of civilians. So I can't really apply much sense to why her or Alfred didn't have profiles before this series. Bucky over here. It is weird to not have a picture of him in the Bucky costume, but I guess it's a short profile. The Beyonders, not to be confused with Beyonder Man. Not yet, anyway. We just had Bucky, so I will repeat this. There was an entry planned for this issue that was a John Walters Captain America profile. He had become US Agent during the cycle of these Handybooks, which, fortunately, puts him at the back of the alphabet, so his profile was able to be reworked. I showed it in the unboxing near the end of that video. I'm not tracking that down, and I am not editing it so that it's actually a bit legible again. Wesley Snipes. Some motherfuckers are always trying to ice skate up my hill. Captain Cold from Thunderbells. This is actually the one from New Thunderbells. We had this guy in one of those Wolfman Handybooks I looked at. Time Bomb. I have explained Time Bomb being listed as her alias, but I can't remember which video that was. Let's think, what have I reviewed with her in? Was it actually in the omnibus? Was it actually in that unboxing video? Time Bomb. And yes, it actually does list Time Bomb under other aliases. So I will explain this. In her first appearance in Secret Wilds II issue 5, there is a typo where she uses her powers and then she's meant to say, I call them time bombs. But the typo makes it sound like she's saying, I call myself time bomb. Fuck it, let's just get the bastard out. Here, she is shown beyond a man her powers, and you can tell from the text before it that she is explaining her powers. But that is a typo. She's meant to say that she calls them time bombs, but she says, I call myself time bomb. Which makes no sense because before that we've already covered what she is called. There is Box. Where do they get their crazy names? There is Box. Where do they get their crazy names from? On the left is Daredevil's enemy, Boulay. And then on the right is Daredevil's more impressive enemy, Bullseye Man, Bushman. Moonman's nemesis, who was bitten by a radioactive 90s alternative rock band. One of these characters is a favourite of mine, and the other is not. Stay tuned until the conclusion to find out it's Bushwhacker Bob. This is an Iron Man love interest from back in the day when he had his own love interests instead of popular characters forced to be his love interests. And no, I'm not going to talk about it. No, absolutely not. It's not canon to me. No way is it canon. It's not canon. I refuse to accept it is canon. It's not canon. Captain Britain, second David Allen's costume. He simplified it down because he was annoyed how nearly every other artist drew the other design all wrong. I found this character insufferably boring whenever he showed up in Cables and Dead Pills. And that was in a book where I found one of the leads insufferable and boring. Cat people. Talk like people, walk like cats. The bane of West Coast Avengers for me. Chameleon. Don't bother reading this profile. Almost all the information is incorrect. And on that topic, here is some data corrections from the 1985 series. That is this first issue of the 89 update. Some good characters in here, and some arbitrary characters they hadn't done profiles for yet. Which character featured within is your favourite? Armageddon, Captain Cold, and Bushwhacker Bob are probably mine. Bucky gets an honourable mention. I only wish they kept at it with his character after Captain America 355, but he fell off into comic book limbo. I was considering giving this 89 thumbs up, but I've had to deduct 82 points for that Robert Liefeld bit of art, so it's only 7 thumbs up for this.